What would you do if your only shelter from a freezing winter storm was a collapsing barn, and the only other living thing inside was a 1,500-pound stallion that had already put 3 trainers in the hospital? Maureen didn't choose to spend that night trapped with Obsidian. She didn't choose to lose her husband 6 months earlier, or to lose the family farm to debt, or to have nowhere else to go when the blizzard hit. But sometimes the universe doesn't ask what we choose. It simply places us exactly where we need to be, even when that place terrifies us. This is the story of a woman who had given up on tomorrow and the broken creature that reminded her why survival matters. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt so defeated that you stopped fighting for yourself, but found yourself fighting for something else instead? Maybe a child, an animal, or even a stranger who needed you more than you needed yourself. Maureen's story explores that exact moment when survival instinct awakens, not for ourselves, but for another soul depending on us. If this resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing where these stories reach. Now let me take you to the winter of 2019, to a forgotten corner of rural Montana, where a widow and a violent horse spent one impossible night together. Maureen Whitmore turned 53 the same week her husband Duncan was buried. There was no cake, no candles, no gathering of friends, just silence in the farmhouse kitchen where they'd celebrated 28 anniversaries, and the sound of snow falling outside like the world itself was mourning. Duncan had been the kind of man who fixed everything: broken fences, broken tractors, broken spirits. When their son Gregory left for college and never came back, choosing Wall Street over wheat fields, Duncan had simply worked harder, as if labor could fill the emptiness. When medical bills from Maureen's cancer treatment 5 years earlier buried them in debt, Duncan took on extra jobs, his hands growing rougher, his shoulders more bent. Then one morning in April, while repairing the barn roof, his heart simply stopped. Maureen found him in the dirt, tools scattered around him like fallen soldiers. The paramedics said he'd died instantly. They said it like that was supposed to be a comfort. The farm had been in Duncan's family for 4 generations. 72 acres of Montana grassland, stubborn soil, and memories soaked into every fence post. But sentiment doesn't pay mortgages. By October, the bank had foreclosed. By November, Maureen had 30 days to vacate. She called Gregory once. He offered to wire her money for a studio apartment in Billings, his voice professionally sympathetic, like she was a client rather than his mother. She thanked him and hung up, knowing she'd never call again. The moving truck came the day before Thanksgiving. Maureen watched strangers carry out her life in boxes: Duncan's tools, their wedding china, the rocking chair where she'd nursed Gregory through fevers and nightmares. She kept one suitcase of clothes, Duncan's winter coat, and a photograph of them on their wedding day, both of them impossibly young, impossibly hopeful. The new owners, a development company from California, weren't taking possession until January. The property would sit empty through the holidays while they secured permits to subdivide the land into half-acre lots for vacation homes. Maureen was supposed to leave. She'd signed papers confirming she understood the property was no longer hers. But when the moving truck pulled away, she simply stayed. She had nowhere else to go. No family except a son who'd already moved on. No close friends after years of Duncan's illness had isolated them. No savings after the medical bills and funeral costs. The senior shelter in town had a 6-month waiting list. The weekly motel wanted first and last month's rent she didn't have, so she remained in the farmhouse like a ghost, haunting her own life, rationing the canned goods left in the pantry, burning furniture in the fireplace when the utilities were shut off, waiting for, she didn't know what, an answer, a sign, the courage to leave or the grace to simply fade away. Then, 3 weeks into December, the horse arrived. She woke one morning to find a massive black stallion in the pasture, its coat gleaming like wet obsidian against the snow. At first, she thought she was hallucinating from hunger and cold, but the animal was real, powerful, and wild, its eyes reflecting something Maureen recognized: fury and fear braided together. A truck appeared that afternoon. Two men in canvas jackets, their faces hard with frustration. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am," the older one said, not sounding sorry at all. "That's our horse. Broke through 3 fences at the training facility down the road. We'll get him loaded and out of your hair." But Obsidian, she heard them call him that, had other plans. When they approached with ropes and a trailer, the stallion exploded. Hooves like hammers, teeth bared, 1,000 pounds of rage and terror. The younger trainer got too close. The horse's hoof caught his shoulder, sending him sprawling into the snow, screaming. The older trainer called for backup on his radio, his voice shaking. "Forget it, Ray. This animal's too dangerous. Owner's insurance will cover putting him down." They left him there, left him to starve or freeze or simply exist in his fury until someone arrived with a rifle and a burial plot. Maureen watched from the kitchen window as the truck drove away, as the stallion paced the fence line like a prisoner, as snow began to fall harder. She should have called animal control, should have stayed inside where it was marginally warmer, where she could pretend none of this was her problem. Instead, she found Duncan's old barn jacket, pulled it over her thin frame, and walked outside into the cold. The barn had been dying for years. Duncan had always meant to fix it: the sagging roof, the rotted boards, the doors that hung crooked on rusted hinges. But there was always something more urgent. Always another crisis demanding attention. Now it stood like a skeleton, its bones showing through weathered skin. Maureen entered through the side door, her breath visible in clouds. Inside smelled of old hay and decay, of time passing and things left undone. She'd avoided this place since Duncan's death, couldn't bear to see his tools still hanging on the wall, the saddles from when they'd kept horses decades ago, before Gregory was born. But today, she had a purpose that overrode her grief. The barn had one intact stall, reinforced years ago when they'd briefly boarded a neighbor's mare. The wood was solid, the gate still functional. If she could somehow get Obsidian inside, he'd at least have shelter from the storm that was clearly coming. The sky had turned that particular shade of grey that meant serious snow, the kind of storm that killed livestock and stranded travelers. She spent the afternoon preparing, found ancient bags of feed in the storage room, probably expired but still fragrant with molasses and grain, filled a trough with water from the manual pump that somehow still worked, spread fresh straw in the stall, her hands remembering work they hadn't done in years. Through the gaps in the barn walls, she could see Obsidian in the pasture, could hear him occasionally scream his rage at the sky. The sound was almost human, almost heartbreaking. By evening, the snow was falling in earnest. Maureen stood in the barn doorway, looking out at the white curtain descending over everything she'd once called home. The temperature was dropping fast. She could feel it in her bones, in the way her breath crystallized instantly. She should go back to the farmhouse, should huddle under every blanket she still possessed and wait out the storm. But something kept her there, in the barn doorway, some instinct she couldn't name. That's when she saw him, a dark shape moving through the falling snow, heading directly toward the barn. Obsidian walked like a king approaching his throne, proud despite everything. His coat was already thick with snow, his mane wild. When he reached the doorway, he stopped, his massive head swinging toward Maureen. They regarded each other across 10 feet of frozen air. His eyes were brown, almost black, ringed with white that suggested fear or fury or both. She could see his sides heaving, could see the scars on his legs where restraints had cut and ropes had burned. This was an animal that had been broken and had refused to break, had been hurt and had learned to hurt back. Maureen didn't move, barely breathed. "I put food in there," she said quietly, gesturing toward the stall. Her voice sounded strange after days of silence. "Water, too. You can stay or go. Your choice." The stallion's ears flicked forward, then back. He took one step inside the barn, then another, moving past Maureen like she was furniture, something too insignificant to fear or fight. He found the stall, found the feed, and for several minutes there was only the sound of him eating, hungry and desperate despite his pride. Maureen slowly, carefully closed the main barn door against the storm. Not trapping him, the stall gate remained open, just blocking the worst of the wind. Then she sank down onto an old hay bale in the corner, as far from the stallion as the space allowed, and watched him eat. She hadn't planned to stay, but the farmhouse seemed impossibly far away now, across an expanse of deepening snow and darkness. And something about this space, this creature, this moment, felt right in a way nothing had felt right since Duncan died. So she stayed. The temperature continued to drop. Through the gaps in the barn walls, Maureen could see the blizzard intensifying, wind driving snow horizontal, drifts forming against anything that stood still long enough. The power lines must have gone down because the distant glow of the neighbor's farm, 2 miles away, disappeared completely. Inside the barn, Obsidian finished eating and moved to the water. He drank long and deep, then stood in the stall, occasionally stamping, his eyes never quite closing. Maureen pulled Duncan's coat tighter around herself. It still smelled like him, sawdust and soap and the particular warmth of his skin. She'd washed it once after he died, then immediately regretted it, desperate to get that smell back, that last physical proof he'd existed. "My husband built this barn," she said aloud, not sure why she was talking except that the silence felt too heavy. "Rebuilt it, actually. His grandfather originally put it up in 1947, but by the time we took over the farm, it was already falling apart. Duncan spent 2 summers making it solid again. He was good at that, making broken things whole." Obsidian's ear swiveled toward her voice, but he didn't move otherwise. "He would have known what to do with you," Maureen continued. "Duncan had a way with animals, patient, never forced anything. He'd say, 'You can't make them trust you, Maureen. You can only make yourself trustworthy and wait.'" Her throat tightened. She hadn't spoken Duncan's name aloud in weeks, hadn't let herself remember the good parts because they made the loss unbearable. "I don't know what I'm doing here," she whispered. "I don't know what I'm doing anywhere anymore." The wind screamed outside, shaking the barn walls. Snow found every crack, every gap, creating small drifts in the corners. The temperature inside was barely warmer than outside, Maureen's breath visible every time she exhaled. She should have been terrified, alone in a collapsing barn with a violent animal, no heat, no help for miles, a blizzard trapping them both. Instead, she felt almost peaceful. Maybe because for the first time in months, she wasn't completely alone. Or maybe because Obsidian's presence demanded something of her, attention, caution, awareness, that pulled her outside her own grief for a moment. Around midnight, the barn door blew open. The wind hit like a physical force, tearing through the barn with enough power to lift loose boards and send them clattering. Snow swirled in, turning the interior instantly white, stinging Maureen's face and hands. Obsidian exploded. He reared in the stall, screaming, his front hooves striking the air, his eyes rolling white with panic. The stall gate, not fully latched, swung open. Suddenly, there was nothing between Maureen and 1,500 pounds of terrified horse. She pressed herself against the wall, making herself as small as possible, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it. This was how it would end, trampled in the same barn where her husband had built their life, her body not found until spring thaw. But Obsidian didn't charge her. He bolted toward the open door instead, toward the storm, choosing freezing freedom over shelter. His shoulder hit the doorframe as he tried to push through, the impact shaking the entire structure. But the wind was too strong, driving snow directly into his face, blinding him. He reared back, turned, tried again. The third attempt, the door itself began to tear loose. Maureen understood in that instant that if Obsidian got out into the blizzard, he would die. Animals could survive cold if they had shelter, water, food. But this storm was different. Temperatures well below zero, wind chills deadly, visibility gone. Even a powerful stallion would become disoriented, would exhaust himself fighting the wind, would eventually lie down in a drift and simply not get up. She didn't decide to move. Her body simply acted, muscle memory from decades of farm life overriding rational thought. She lunged for the door, grabbing it with both hands, throwing her full weight against it to close it against the wind. The wood was icy, biting into her palms. She was screaming, she realized. Not words, just sound, effort and desperation given voice. Obsidian wheeled toward her, trapped now between Maureen and the far wall. His ears were flat against his skull, his nostrils flared. He could kill her with one kick, one bite, one moment of pure instinct. "Stop!" Maureen shouted, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Just stop! I'm trying to help you!" Maybe it was the desperation in her voice. Maybe it was exhaustion from his own terror. Maybe it was simply chance. But Obsidian didn't attack. He stood there, trembling, his entire body taut with the urge to flee. But something, some thread of reason or recognition or sheer exhaustion, keeping him still. Maureen managed to wedge the door closed, shoving an old barrel against it to hold it in place. The wind immediately found new cracks to howl through, but at least the worst of it was blocked. She turned back to find Obsidian watching her, his sides heaving, foam at the corners of his mouth. They were both breathing hard, both covered in snow, both trapped. "It's okay," Maureen said, though nothing about this was okay. "We're okay. We're safe in here." The lie hung in the frozen air between them, because they weren't safe. The barn was barely standing. The temperature was still dropping. Maureen had no food, no water for herself, no way to call for help even if help could reach them through the storm. Her phone had died 2 days ago when the electricity was shut off and she couldn't charge it anymore. She was going to freeze to death in this barn. The thought was strangely calm, almost a relief. At least it would be over. At least she wouldn't have to figure out where to go, how to survive, why to keep trying. But then she looked at Obsidian again, at the way he was still shaking, still afraid, still fighting every instinct to survive in this moment. And something shifted inside her chest. "All right," she said aloud, her voice steadier. "All right, we need to think." She moved slowly, carefully, keeping herself small and non-threatening, and retrieved the old horse blanket she'd seen earlier hanging on the wall. It was moth-eaten and musty, but it was wool, real wool from before everything was synthetic. She approached the stall area, not too close to Obsidian, and spread the blanket over the stall gate. "Body heat," she explained, talking to the horse because talking to herself felt too much like surrendering to madness. "We need to conserve body heat. This blanket will help trap warmth in your area, and I need to—" She looked around the barn, at the scattered hay bales, the old tarp in the corner, Duncan's emergency supplies that had sat untouched for years. Maureen had spent 6 months in a fog of grief, barely eating, barely sleeping, barely existing. But she'd grown up on this farm. She'd survived Montana winters before central heating. She'd helped deliver calves in February snowstorms and repaired water lines that burst at 20 below zero. She knew how to survive. She'd just forgotten she wanted to. For the next hour, she worked. Found Duncan's old emergency kit with waterproof matches and a Coleman lantern that miraculously still had fuel. Got it lit, the small flame immediately making the barn feel less hostile. Found the old tarp and fashioned a windbreak in the corner farthest from Obsidian, creating a small space where she could huddle. Dragged hay bales to build a nest of sorts, the dried grass providing insulation from the frozen ground. Obsidian watched her the entire time, his eyes following her movements. Occasionally he'd stamp or shake his mane, but he didn't charge, didn't attack. He seemed almost curious about what this strange two-legged creature was doing. When Maureen finally settled into her makeshift shelter, wrapped in an old canvas tarp with hay bales surrounding her, the lantern glowing nearby, she felt almost warm, or at least less immediately dying. She could see Obsidian from her position, could watch him settle slightly, could see his breathing begin to steady. "We're going to be okay," she told him, and this time it wasn't quite a lie. "We're going to make it through tonight." Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, two broken creatures found themselves unexpectedly alive. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Maureen stopped being able to feel her feet. She'd been flexing them periodically, trying to keep circulation going, but her boots were old and not rated for this kind of cold. The tarp and hay helped, but they couldn't stop the relentless creep of hypothermia. She knew the signs. Duncan's father had lost 3 toes to frostbite in the winter of '88. Numbness first, then a strange warmth that felt like relief, but was actually your body giving up, redirecting blood from extremities to core organs in a last, desperate attempt at survival. Maureen forced herself to stand, to move, to stomp her feet, even though each impact sent shards of pain up her legs. She couldn't let herself drift off. Sleep in this cold meant not waking up. Obsidian was lying down now in the stall, which was good. Horses usually stood to sleep, only lying down when they felt safe or when they were too exhausted to stand. She wasn't sure which category this was, but at least he was conserving energy. "Tell me about yourself," Maureen said, her words slightly slurred from cold. "Where'd you come from, big guy? What made you so angry?" Of course, he didn't answer, but talking kept her awake, kept her focused on something beyond the cold. "I heard them call you obsidian. That's a volcanic glass, you know. Forms when lava cools too quickly for crystals to form. Sharp edges, breaks into blades. I wonder if whoever named you knew how fitting it would be." She walked small circles in her corner, arms wrapped around herself, Duncan's coat pulled tight. The lantern was burning low. She'd have to turn it off soon to conserve fuel, and then there would only be darkness and cold, and the sound of the wind. "I had a son," she continued, words tumbling out now. "Gregory. He was beautiful. Duncan's eyes, my stubborn streak. When he was little, maybe 5 or 6, he got lost during harvest season, wandered off into the wheat fields that were taller than him. We searched for hours, panicking, imagining every horrible thing. Found him asleep in a furrow, completely peaceful, like the earth itself was rocking him. He said he'd been following a rabbit." Maureen's throat tightened. "He followed that rabbit all the way to New York eventually. Chased something we couldn't give him here. Money, prestige, distance from dirt and struggle. I don't blame him, not really. This life is hard. It takes everything and gives back just enough to keep you trying, until it doesn't." Obsidian's ear flicked toward her voice. His eyes were open, watching her in the dim lantern light. "Duncan always said Gregory would come back. Said the land was in his blood, same as ours, that you can't run from what you are forever. But Duncan believed in second chances, in happy endings, in things working out if you just held on long enough." Her voice cracked. He was wrong about that last part. She stopped moving, steadied herself against a support beam. The wood was so cold it burned her palm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I'm not stronger. I'm sorry I don't know how to do this without him. I'm sorry I'm such a mess that I'm talking to a horse in a collapsing barn instead of fighting to actually live." That's when she heard it. A sound from Obsidian. Not a scream or a whinny, but something softer. Almost a rumble, coming from deep in his chest. Not quite a nicker, but not aggressive either. Almost like acknowledgement. Maureen looked at him through the darkness. His eyes were still on her, and in them she saw something she recognized. Not pity. Animals didn't do pity. But something else. Understanding, maybe, or just shared presence in this moment of impossible cold. "You've lost things too, haven't you?" she asked quietly. "Freedom. Trust. Whatever life you had before humans decided you'd be better broken." She moved slowly, carefully, closer to the stall than she'd dared before. Not inside it, she wasn't suicidal, but near enough to see him clearly in the failing lantern light. "They were going to kill you," she said. "Did you know that? Those trainers called you too dangerous, said you weren't worth the trouble, going to put you down like you were the problem, like you being angry after being hurt was somehow your fault." Obsidian shifted slightly, his muscles tensing. But he didn't rise, didn't threaten. "I get it," Maureen continued. "I do. Everyone wants you to just accept it. Accept the pain, the loss, the injustice. Move on. Be reasonable. Don't make a fuss. But sometimes, the hurt is so deep that the only honest response is rage. Sometimes breaking is the only way to stay whole. She leaned against the stall gate, her legs finally giving out, sliding down to sit in the hay. The cold from the ground immediately seeped through her jeans, but she was too tired to stand anymore. "But here's what I'm realizing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. "Rage keeps you alive, but it doesn't give you a reason to live. I've been so angry at Duncan for dying, at Gregory for leaving, at God or the universe or whoever for making this life so hard. And the anger kept my heart beating, kept blood moving, but it didn't give me anything to wake up for." The lantern flickered, nearly out. "Except tonight," Maureen said. "Tonight I had you to keep alive, and keeping you alive meant keeping myself alive. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's how we survive. Not for ourselves, but for whatever small thing needs us in that moment." The lantern died, plunging the barn into complete darkness. For a moment, Maureen's breath caught. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. She couldn't see Obsidian, couldn't see the walls around her, couldn't see her own hands in front of her face. But she could hear him, his breathing, steady and deep. The shift of his weight against the straw, the solid proof that she wasn't alone. "Okay," she said into the darkness. "Okay, we've got a few more hours until dawn. We just need to make it until dawn." She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped Duncan's coat around herself like armor, and focused on staying conscious, staying present, staying alive for just a few more hours. The wind screamed outside like it wanted in, wanted to claim them both. But inside the barn, two broken creatures held their ground. Maureen woke to the sound of silence. For a confused moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why every part of her body hurt. Then reality assembled itself. The barn, the storm, the horse, the cold that had settled into her bones like permanent winter. But the wind had stopped. She forced her eyes open. They'd partially frozen shut, crusted with ice from her breath, and saw pale grey light filtering through the gaps in the barn walls. Dawn. She'd survived until dawn. She tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Her legs weren't responding properly, pins and needles shooting through them as blood tried to recirculate. Her hands were white, fingers barely bendable. Early-stage frostbite, probably. She'd seen it before in animals left too long in the cold. But she was alive. Maureen used the stall gate to pull herself upright, her joints screaming in protest. That's when she realized Obsidian was standing right there, his massive head hanging over the gate, his dark eyes fixed on her. They were less than 3 feet apart. She froze, every muscle tensing despite the pain. This was the moment. This was when the horse, feeling threatened by her proximity or just acting on pure instinct, would strike. One bite to her shoulder, one hoof to her skull, and this story would have a very different ending. But Obsidian just looked at her. His breath created clouds in the frozen air between them, and she could see that his coat was thick with frost, that he'd suffered through the night too. "Hi," Maureen whispered, her voice cracked and rough. "We made it." The stallion's ears flicked forward, not flat with aggression, not back with fear, just forward, listening. Moving very slowly, Maureen reached out her hand. Not to touch him, she wasn't foolish, but just to extend it, palm up, letting him see she wasn't holding anything, wasn't threatening anything. Obsidian lowered his head slightly, his nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. She could feel the warmth of his breath on her frozen palm, the first warmth she'd felt in hours. They stayed like that for a long moment. Woman and horse, both beaten by different storms, both still standing. Then Obsidian pulled back, turned, and moved to his water trough. Finding it frozen solid, he snorted in frustration and poured at it. "Right," Maureen said, her brain slowly beginning to function again. "You need water. So do I." She had to break through 6 inches of ice on the trough, using a hammer from Duncan's tool wall. Her hands were clumsy, nearly dropping the hammer twice, but eventually she created a hole large enough for Obsidian to drink. He did so eagerly, and she realized he probably hadn't had enough water yesterday, too stressed and scared to drink his fill. While he drank, Maureen pushed open the barn door. What she saw took her breath away. The world had been transformed. Snow covered everything in drifts 4 and 5 feet high, sculpted by the wind into fantastic shapes. The sun was just rising, painting the white landscape in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful and terrible, a reminder that nature doesn't care about human struggles or animal fears. It simply exists in all its deadly glory. The farmhouse was completely buried on one side. Snow drifted nearly to the roof. The road was invisible, lost beneath an ocean of white. They were completely cut off from everything, but the barn, Duncan's barn with its sagging roof and rotted boards, had held. Maureen felt tears freeze on her cheeks. "Thank you, Duncan," she whispered. "Thank you for building this place strong enough to save us." A sound behind her made her turn. Obsidian had come to the doorway, standing beside her, looking out at the transformed landscape. He was so close she could have touched his shoulder, could have reached out and felt his living warmth. She didn't, but she could have, and that felt significant. "We can't stay here," she told him. "Without heat, without proper food. We'll just freeze slower. When the road's clear, people will come. And when they do—" She trailed off, not wanting to speak the rest aloud. When they came, they'd take Obsidian away, back to whatever facility had tried to break him, or worse, to wherever they sent dangerous animals that no one could handle. And Maureen would be removed from property she no longer owned, taken to whatever shelter or facility would accept a penniless widow with early frostbite and no next of kin who cared. The sun rose higher, bringing no warmth, but at least bringing light. Maureen rationed out the last of the feed for Obsidian, broke through the ice again for his water. For herself, she ate snow, knowing it would lower her body temperature further, but having no choice. Dehydration would kill her faster than cold. Around midday, she heard it, the distant sound of an engine. Her first instinct was relief, rescue was coming. But then she looked at Obsidian, at the way he'd started pacing, his ears already picking up the sound she'd barely noticed, his body tensing with recognition and fear. The snowplow came first, clearing the main road a quarter-mile away. Then, maybe an hour later, a truck turned down what used to be the farm's driveway. Maureen watched from the barn doorway as it struggled through the deep snow, getting stuck twice before finally making it to the cleared area near the farmhouse. 2 men got out. One was Ray, the trainer from before. The other was wearing a county sheriff's uniform. Her heart sank. "Mrs. Whitmore," the sheriff called, spotting her. "We got a welfare check request from the bank that owns this property. Are you all right?" She could say no, could tell them she was freezing, starving, that she'd spent the night trapped in a barn with a dangerous animal and nearly died. They'd take her to the hospital, get her warm, get her fed, get her placed somewhere safe. And they'd shoot Obsidian. She could see the rifle in the truck's rear window, could see the way Ray was already looking toward the barn, his hand resting on what was probably a tranquilizer gun. Maureen looked back at the stallion standing in the shadows of the barn, at this creature that had spent the night with her, that could have killed her a dozen times over, that had chosen to simply exist alongside her instead. This creature that had given her a reason to survive when she'd forgotten why survival mattered. She turned back to the sheriff and did something she hadn't done in months. She fought. "I'm fine," Maureen called back, her voice stronger than she felt. "Thank you for checking, but we're both fine." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "We?" Ray pushed forward. "The horse. That devil horse is still here, isn't it? Ma'am, you need to step away from the barn. That animal is dangerous. It put Jerome in the hospital with a separated shoulder and nearly killed me when we tried to retrieve it yesterday. Because you came at him with ropes and force," Maureen said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "Because you treated him like a problem to be solved instead of a living creature in distress." "Mrs. Whitmore," the sheriff said carefully, approaching with his hands visible, non-threatening. "I understand you've been through a lot. The bank informed us of your situation, but you can't stay here. This property is in foreclosure, and frankly, you nearly froze to death last night. We need to get you somewhere warm and safe." "And the horse?" Maureen asked, though she already knew the answer. Ray didn't hesitate. Has to be put down. Owner's orders. Too aggressive, can't be trained, poses a liability. We brought equipment to do it humanely. No. The word came out of Maureen's mouth before her brain fully processed what she was saying, but once it was out there, hanging in the cold air between them, she felt something shift inside her chest. A door opening that had been locked since Duncan died. "Ma'am," Ray started, but Maureen cut him off. "No," she repeated, stronger this time. "You're not killing him." "Mrs. Whitmore," the sheriff tried. "Maureen," she interrupted. "My name is Maureen, and that horse's name is Obsidian. Not it. Not devil. Obsidian. And he survived last night, same as me, and he didn't hurt me once, and you're not going to kill him." Ray laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Lady, you don't have a say in this. That animal belongs to Clearwater Training Facility, and they've authorized its destruction. You're trespassing on foreclosed property. The sheriff should be arresting you, not negotiating." Something in Maureen snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the cold, the months of grief and helplessness. Maybe it was the way Ray said "lady," like she was simple. Maybe it was just that she'd survived an impossible night and wasn't about to watch that survival mean nothing. "Then arrest me," she said, stepping fully out of the barn, letting them see her clearly, frost-covered, shaking with cold, but standing. "Arrest me for trespassing, for whatever you want. But you're not setting foot in this barn. You're not touching that horse." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Maureen, please be reasonable. You're hypothermic, probably have frostbite. You need medical attention. Then call an ambulance and treat me here," she said. "But I'm not leaving, and neither is he." "This is ridiculous," Ray muttered, moving toward the barn. "I'll just trank the horse from here and—" Maureen moved faster than she thought possible, positioning herself directly in the barn doorway, arms spread. "You'll have to go through me." Time seemed to freeze. The three of them stood in the snow, breath visible, the absurdity of the situation hanging between them. A half-frozen widow defending a violent horse on property she didn't own, facing down a sheriff and a professional trainer. Then, behind Maureen, she heard movement, hoofbeats approaching. Obsidian appeared in the doorway beside her. Ray immediately raised the tranquilizer gun, but the sheriff put a hand on his arm. "Wait." The stallion stood there, massive and dark against the snow, his head high, his eyes fixed on the men. He was magnificent, Maureen realized. Despite everything, the scars, the fear, the trauma, he was absolutely magnificent. And he was standing with her, not attacking, not fleeing, standing beside her like they were in this together. "Mrs. Whitmore," the sheriff said slowly, his voice different now. "How long have you been working with this horse?" "Since yesterday," Maureen said honestly. "Since you left him here to die." "That's impossible," Ray said. "This animal is untrainable. It's taken us 6 months and 3 professional handlers to get nowhere. You expect us to believe you spent one night with it and now it's suddenly calm?" "I didn't train him," Maureen said. "I just survived with him. We survived together." The sheriff studied her, studied Obsidian, studied the barn behind them. She could see him doing the calculation, weighing regulations against reality, policy against the strange tableau in front of him. "Ray," he finally said, "put the gun away." "Sheriff, the owner authorized—" "I said, put it away." His voice held authority now. "I'm not watching you shoot a horse, standing peacefully beside a woman on what might be the coldest day of the year. We're going to figure something else out." "There is nothing else to figure out." Ray was nearly shouting now. "This animal is a liability. It's dangerous. The insurance won't—" "Then Clearwater can revoke their claim," a new voice said. They all turned. A second truck had arrived, this one struggling through the snow that the plow had moved to the sides of the road. An older woman climbed out, her silver hair pulled back, her face weathered but kind. Maureen recognized her, Elena Pritchard, who ran the horse rescue 2 counties over. Duncan had helped her transport a neglected mare once, years ago. "Elena," Maureen said, confused. "Sheriff called me on his way here," Elena explained, walking toward them with the confidence of someone who'd spent her entire life around horses. "Said there was a situation that might need my expertise. Didn't mention it would be Maureen Whitmore facing down half the county to save a horse." She turned to Ray. Let me guess. Clearwater bought this stallion cheap at auction, thinking they'd break him and resell him for 10 times what they paid. And when their aggressive methods didn't work, they decided killing him was cheaper than admitting they'd failed. Ray's face reddened. Our training methods are industry standard. Your training methods turned a probably traumatized but trainable horse into an aggressive animal. Elena interrupted. I've seen it 100 times. Horses aren't machines. Break them wrong, and they stay broken. She walked right up to the barn, moving slowly and deliberately. Obsidian's ears flicked toward her, but he didn't move, didn't threaten. Hello, beautiful, Elena said softly. You've had a rough time, haven't you? To Maureen's amazement, Obsidian lowered his head slightly, not submissive but responsive, like he recognized someone who understood. Elena turned back to the sheriff. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make Clearwater an offer for this horse. Whatever they paid, plus whatever the insurance payout would have been. They'll take it because it means they're not liable anymore. Then I'm going to transport him to my facility, properly, and we're going to work with him at his pace, not ours. And Mrs. Whitmore? The sheriff asked. Elena looked at Maureen, her eyes sharp and assessing. Maureen, you got anywhere to go? Maureen shook her head, too overwhelmed to speak. Then you're coming with me, too. My facility manager just quit to move to Oregon. Position comes with room and board, small salary, and all the horses you can handle. You interested? It was too much. After months of darkness, of loss, of slowly fading away, suddenly there was possibility. Light where there'd been none. A door opening when she'd thought all doors were locked. Maureen started, her voice breaking. I don't. Why? Elena smiled. Because anyone who'll spend a blizzard in a barn with a dangerous horse to keep them both alive is exactly the kind of stubborn, compassionate, slightly crazy person I need on my team. Plus, Obsidian trusts you. That matters. Maureen looked at the horse beside her, at this creature she'd known for less than 24 hours, but who had somehow given her back something she'd thought was lost forever, a reason to fight, a reason to live. Yes, she whispered, then stronger. Yes. They left the farm 2 days later. The county cleared the roads, the weather warmed to merely freezing instead of deadly, and Elena came with a proper horse trailer and blankets and food Maureen had forgotten existed. Hot soup, fresh bread, coffee that tasted like hope. Maureen walked through the farmhouse one last time. It was strange how empty it already felt, as if Duncan's presence had been waiting for her to be ready to move on, and now it could finally leave too. She took only 3 things: their wedding photograph, Duncan's coat, and a small wooden box from his workshop that contained the deed to the farm, the original one from 1947, when his grandfather first bought this land. It wasn't worth anything legally anymore, but it was history. It was proof they'd existed here, mattered here, built something here. Loading Obsidian into the trailer proved easier than anyone expected. Maureen simply walked up the ramp, and after a moment's hesitation, the stallion followed her. Ray, who'd come to help despite his skepticism, looked like he'd seen a miracle. I don't understand it, he muttered to Eleanor. 6 months of professional training, and he nearly killed 3 people. 2 days with her, and he's docile as a lamb. He's not docile, Elena corrected. He's choosing to cooperate. There's a difference. And maybe that's what he needed all along, to be given a choice instead of being forced. The drive to Elena's rescue was 3 hours through mountain roads, still treacherous with ice. Maureen rode in the truck cab with Elena, watching the landscape roll past. White fields and dark forests, the occasional farmhouse with smoke rising from chimneys, signs of life continuing despite the cold. Tell me about your place, Maureen said, partly to make conversation, partly to distract herself from the fact that she was leaving the only home she'd ever known. Elena smiled. 35 acres of rolling pasture, 12-stall barn with an indoor arena, and currently 14 horses in various stages of recovery and rehabilitation. We take in the ones nobody else wants. The too old, too damaged, too difficult. Give them time, patience, proper care, and see if they can find themselves again. Sounds expensive. It is. We run on donations, volunteers, and my stubbornness. The facility manager position honestly doesn't pay much, but the work matters, and the people who do it tend to be the ones who understand what it's like to need a second chance. Maureen looked out the window at the passing landscape. I don't know anything about running a rescue operation. You know how to survive when survival seems impossible, Elena said quietly. You know how to keep fighting when you've forgotten why. You know how to see a creature everyone else has given up on and decide they're worth saving. That's exactly the kind of knowing I need. They arrived just before sunset. The rescue facility was beautiful in its simplicity. Weathered buildings that spoke of care and use, fences that were mended but sturdy, horses visible in paddocks, wearing blankets against the cold, their breath creating clouds in the golden light. Elena gave Maureen a tour, while other staff members helped unload Obsidian into a private paddock, where he could decompress without pressure from other horses. The barn was warm, heated by wood stoves that crackled with welcoming fire. The facility manager's quarters were small but cozy, a bedroom, tiny kitchen, bathroom with hot water that seemed like impossible luxury after days without. Take tonight to settle in, Elena said. Tomorrow we'll go over routines, introduce you to the other horses, figure out a plan for working with Obsidian. But tonight, just rest. You've earned it. After Elena left, Maureen stood in the middle of her new room, still wearing Duncan's coat, still cold despite the warmth of the space. It didn't feel real yet. This morning she'd been squatting in a foreclosed farmhouse with no future and no hope. Tonight she had a job, a home, a purpose. She walked out to the paddock where Obsidian had been settled. The stallion was standing near the fence, looking out at his new surroundings. When he saw Maureen, his ears pricked forward. She approached the fence slowly, carefully. What do you think? She asked him. Think we can make this work? Obsidian walked toward her, closing the distance between them. For a long moment, they simply stood there on opposite sides of the fence, woman and horse, both scarred, both surviving, both impossibly here. Then, very gently, Obsidian lowered his head and pressed his forehead against Maureen's chest. Not aggressive, not demanding, just connecting. Maureen raised her hand and for the first time touched him. Her fingers found the rough silk of his forelock, the warmth of his living skin, the solid proof that both of them had made it through the impossible night. Yeah, she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. We're going to be okay. 6 months later, on a warm June morning, Maureen stood in the center of the indoor arena and watched Obsidian walk in circles around her. No rope, no halter, no force of any kind, just a woman standing still and a horse who chose to stay close. It'd been slow work, weeks of simply existing near each other, of Maureen cleaning his paddock while he watched, of her sitting on the fence reading aloud from Duncan's old farming journals while Obsidian grazed nearby, building trust the way Duncan had always said you had to, not by demanding it, but by being trustworthy and waiting. The first time Obsidian let her touch his shoulder without flinching, she'd cried. The first time he followed her from paddock to barn of his own accord, Elena had photographed it like it was a miracle. Maybe it was. Now, Maureen made a soft clicking sound, and Obsidian stopped, turned to face her, waited. Good, she said softly. Good boy. She still didn't ride him, might never ride him, and that was okay. The point wasn't to break him to saddle. The point was to let him be a horse again, to give him choices, to prove that humans could be something other than pain. Elena appeared in the arena doorway, a wide smile on her weathered face. You two ready for a visitor? Maureen's eyebrows rose. Who? Come see. Maureen gave Obsidian a final pat and walked toward the barn entrance. Standing there, looking uncomfortable and out of place in his New York business casual, was Gregory. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Hi, Mom, he said finally. Gregory. Her voice was neutral, not cold, but not warm either. She'd called him once, after moving to the rescue, to let him know she was okay, that he didn't need to worry. The call had been brief, polite, distant. He seemed to struggle with words. This man who made his living negotiating million-dollar deals. I should have come sooner, should have helped. After Dad died, after the farm, I should have been there. Yes, Maureen agreed quietly. You should have. He flinched but nodded. I know I failed you both. I couldn't face it. Couldn't face coming back here, seeing the farm go under, admitting that everything Dad built was gone. So you left me to face it alone. Yes. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Maureen looked at her son, her beautiful, broken, complicated son, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness would take time, would take work, would take him proving he meant his words with actions. But maybe the beginning of a path toward it. Why are you here now? She asked. Gregory pulled out his phone, showed her a Facebook post. It was a photo Eleanor had shared of Maureen working with Obsidian, the caption explaining how a widow and a dangerous horse had saved each other. It had been shared thousands of times, had raised significant donations for the rescue. Someone from the old town tagged me, Gregory said. Said, isn't this your mother? And I saw you in that photo, saw you looking more alive than you'd looked in years, and I realized I'd convinced myself you were better off without me, when really I was just scared to face what I'd done, what I hadn't done. He looked past her at the arena, at Obsidian, watching them from across the space. Is that the horse from the story? The one everyone said was too dangerous? That's Obsidian. He doesn't look dangerous. He's not. He's traumatized. There's a difference. Maureen paused. People gave up on him because he wasn't easy, because healing him would take time and patience and care with no guarantee of results. But he wasn't the problem. The people who tried to break him instead of heal him, they were the problem. Gregory was quiet for a long moment. Are you talking about the horse or about me? Maureen met her son's eyes. Maybe both. Can I? Gregory swallowed hard. Can I stay for a few days, help out around here, get to know what you're doing? I have vacation time I never use. I could... Yes, Maureen interrupted, because she recognized that look in his eyes, the same desperate hope she'd felt when Elena offered her a second chance, the fragile, terrifying belief that maybe it wasn't too late to build something from the wreckage. Gregory's relief was visible. Thank you, I'll get my bag from the car and... Gregory, Maureen stopped him. This doesn't fix everything, you understand that? I know, but it's a start. He smiled, and for just a moment, she saw the little boy who'd gotten lost in the wheat fields, who'd followed rabbits and believed in magic. A start is all I'm asking for. Maureen walks through the rescue at dawn now, checking on each horse, talking to them like they're old friends. Obsidian follows her sometimes, his dark coat gleaming in the early light, his eyes peaceful in a way they weren't that first night. The barn Duncan built finally collapsed last month, she heard. The new owners of the property are building vacation homes where wheat once grew, where a man once repaired a roof with hands that knew how to fix everything except a failing heart. But some things Duncan built are still standing. His widow. His son, who visits monthly now and has started donating his Wall Street bonus to the rescue. The belief that broken things can heal if given time and patience and care. Gregory asked her once if she regretted it, spending that night in the barn, risking everything for a horse she didn't know. She thought about it carefully before answering. I regret a lot of things, she told him. I regret not being stronger after your father died. I regret letting grief consume me so completely I almost disappeared. I regret the months I wasted giving up. She paused, looked out at Obsidian grazing peacefully in morning sun. But that night, that was the night I chose to survive. Not for myself, I'd forgotten how to do that, but for a creature that needed me to hold on just a little longer. And in holding on for him, I learned to hold on for myself again. Some people are saved by grand gestures, by interventions and revelations and dramatic rescues, but sometimes salvation is quieter. Sometimes it's a freezing night in a collapsing barn. Sometimes it's a dangerous horse who chooses gentleness. Sometimes it's the simple act of surviving one more hour, one more moment, until you remember that survival can lead somewhere other than just more pain. Maureen survived. Obsidian survived. And in surviving together, they both found something worth living for. That's not just a story about a widow and a horse. That's a story about hope itself.